In western Oregon, among the gray clouded hills and the wild prairies that stretch across the horizon, there is a place called Elm Ridge, a town of a few hundred people, quaint, quiet, and almost forgotten on the map. Outside the hustle and bustle of the big cities, Elm Ridge lives slowly, sometimes almost dead. The trees are dry, the grass is scorched by the footsteps of the old native girls, and here among the dry hills is Farm 43. The farm belongs to the Gilman family, who have been working in this country for more than 3 generations. They live frugally like other farmers, raising cattle, farming, sometimes being blackened by poverty and hardship. In the pig pen at the end of the field, they raise a flock of sheep for wool and meat. And in that flock, there is a white sheep with the gentle and silly name Mary. Mary was the most special sheep in the barn. Normally, the other sheep would run away when they heard a human voice, but Mary walked closer, tilted her head, and bleated with affection. Many people joked that she looked like a child, a sentient being. The Gilman family considered Mary their mascot for good luck, until one night in the fall when the pasture began to get sick, something happened. Around 2 a.m., the security camera in the barn recorded something. A young man was sneaking into the farm. He seemed drunk or had to scout for sheep and must have chosen Mary. As he got closer, the man opened the sack to tie it up. The camera jerked. The black and white camera shook violently. Then nothing. Just an empty frame and the dragon sack. The next morning, people found scrabbling footprints next to the barn. The pasture was disturbed, and a small bloodstain. Gilman thought it was a stray dog, but there were no bite marks on the sheep. Everything was neat except for Mary, who was licking up the pink cement. From that day on, Elm Ridge changed. News of missing bodies spread over the radio. Young girls who went out for a night walk never came home again. Someone said they heard a bleating sound in the middle of the night, but then a heart-rending wail. While other farms began to stop raising livestock, the Gilmans kept Mary. They seemed to be hypnotized by her or worshipped her. Only one boy in the neighborhood, Elliot, saw something that October night. He went looking for the cat, crawling along the moonlit dirt, and saw a creature hiding in the tall grass. At first, he thought it was Mary, but when the creature turned around, he saw red eyes of rage, a gaping mouth that was no longer like a sheep but like a shark. Elliot dropped his flashlight and ran back. From that day on, he became silent. The next morning, the town of Red Hollow was unusually quiet. News of the Yates' gruesome deaths had not yet spread widely, but the neighbors were already whispering. The police cordoned off the house, patrol cars rolling by, and the sound of the forensic unit's generators. Blood, flesh, and scratches covered the small kitchen, and no one dared to describe the scene. Inspector Brad Morrison was the first to be called to the scene. He was a veteran, having investigated dozens of murders, but no one had ever seen him vomit like that when he entered the Yates house. His eyes were glazed, his hands shaking as he removed his gloves, whispering to his partner, "This isn't human, this is an animal, but no ordinary animal." Elsewhere, nearly 30 miles from Red Hollow, on an old farm outside Granite Falls, a boy named Joey was petting a small white sheep his grandfather had just brought home from the trading post. "What did you name it?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron. Joey smiled and patted the sheep's head. "Snowy, I guess, because its wool is as white as snow." The sheep rubbed against the boy. It had deep black eyes like ancient wells and never squealed when startled or hungry. Joey's grandfather found it a little strange, but he didn't care. Sheep were sheep, gentle, active, and just needed to be fed on time. That night it was raining. The wind howled through the cracks in the wooden door. Joey was sleeping when he suddenly opened his eyes to the sound of something rattling outside the barn. Snowy? He got out of bed, grabbed his flashlight, and went to the back of the house. The rain made everything cold, and visibility was limited. As he approached the cage, he found the door wide open. the ropes shredded, and no trace of Snowy. In Red Hollow, the disappearances began. 3 hikers went hiking in the woods, never to return. A truck driver stopped in the middle of the highway, leaving his car idling, a trail of blood trailing out to the edge of the woods. Inspector Morrison pinned a map of the area to the wall and began placing small nails at the vanishing points. Most frightening of all the victims disappeared at night when thick fog blanketed the forests surrounding the town. "We're dealing with a predator," Morrison said at a secret meeting with the sheriff. "And it's intelligent. It moves like a purpose, not like an ordinary animal. Maybe something that's never been seen before." That night in Granite Falls, Snowy returned. But Joey had no idea what had happened to the gentle sheep at first. Snowy stood in the pen, his eyes still deep as black holes. But now, in the darkness, they glowed a faint red. His tongue was longer than usual, and his muzzle sometimes quivered as if he were trying to suppress a roar. Joey opened the pen door. "Snowy, where are you going? I was worried about you." Snowy walked slowly toward the boy, then stopped. He tilted his head, looking at Joey as if considering, but then, like magic, he nuzzled his head into his hand. Joey smiled, not knowing that that night, another massacre had just occurred in the suburbs of the next town. A family of 5, torn to pieces beyond recognition. Back at Red Hollow, Morrison received a sample of white wool from the scene of the new murder. He took it to the lab. "We found sheep DNA," the forensic expert stammered. "But not exactly. There are some mutations, very strong, almost like hybrid with an apex predator." "Hybrid what?" "I don't know, but if it exists, it's a killer." Morrison lit a cigarette, his hand shaking. He had lived long enough to believe in things that science couldn't explain. A monster in sheep's clothing? It sounded like a joke. But looking at the red map covered in nails, no one dared to laugh anymore. He circled Granite Falls on the map. Joey began to notice strange things. Snowy never slept. He just stood there, staring out the door all night. One day, he woke up and found his door open. Snowy was standing in the middle of the hallway, looking straight into his parents' room. "Snowy?" Joey whispered. "What are you doing?" Snowy didn't turn around. There was only the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the door. Joey touched its back. Cold, cold as ice. Morrison drove through the night to Granite Falls. Something was stirring inside him. As he entered the town, he felt the heavy, silent air, as if every soul had frozen. A cold wind blew, and he saw animal tracks, clear on the wet ground. Not sheep tracks. Not quite. They were hoof prints. A heavy rain poured down on Granite Falls on Saturday night, as if the heavens were trying to wash away something dark that was growing in the heart of the town. The sky was covered with thick clouds, making the night as dark as ink. In the small house next to the farm, Joey was still awake. He was starting to fear Snowy. Not the kind of fear that children get when they're scared of ghosts, but real fear. His instincts told him that the creature, though it looked like a sheep, was not a sheep. Snowy didn't blink. Snowy never ate when anyone was watching. And worse, every morning when he woke up, the barn door was still locked. But Snowy's back was covered in red dirt, moss, and sometimes dried blood. At the same time, Inspector Morrison stood at the scene of a new attack at a small motel deep in the woods next to the highway. The entire family of 3 had been murdered. There was no screaming, no signs of forced entry, no trail of blood. Everything was neat and tidy, as if someone or something had done it like a murder artist. There was only one clue, a clump of white feathers that had fallen near the window, stained with blood. Morrison picked up the feathers and raised his head to look at the edge of the woods. The wind whistled through the trees, and he suddenly felt someone's eyes watching him from afar. Not a person. At Joey's house that night, the unthinkable happened. Joey was awakened by a terrible noise, like bones breaking, like flesh being torn. He rushed out of bed and opened the door to his parents' room. The scene inside made him scream. His mother lay on her back on the floor, blood pouring from her neck, her eyes rolled back. His father was missing an arm, collapsed on the windowsill. And standing in the middle of the room, a creature shaped like a sheep, but more than twice as tall as a normal human, was looking down at him. Its fur was ragged, red with blood. Its eyes glowed a fiery orange. Its mouth was no longer a sheep's snout, but a mass of jagged teeth that extended all the way to its neck. Joey turned and ran. He didn't know how he survived, but he remembered running out of the house, into the woods, pouring rain, falling over and over, but the creature didn't chase. It just stood there, watching. Morrison got the call at 3 a.m. A child survived, a family murdered. When he arrived at the scene, Joey's house was sealed. Joey was taken to the town police station, still in a state of utter panic. "It's a sheep," Joey whispered. "But not a sheep. It stood on 2 legs. It had claws. It looked me in the eye." "Do you know where it went?" Morrison asked softly. "No, but it let you live." "Why did it let you live?" Morrison clenched his fists. This was no ordinary case. He needed a clue, and he had only one. The creature's tracks always pointed toward the next town. In the town of Raven Creek, a middle-aged man named Douglas, a bachelor and sheep driver, had just received a strange animal released into his flock. No one knew where it had come from, only that one morning it stood in the middle of the field as if it had always belonged there. It didn't blend in. It didn't bleat. It didn't eat grass. And when Douglas tried to shoo it away from the flock, it stood still, staring at him with its black eyes. Douglas didn't return home that night. All they found was his pelvis behind the sheep pen and a trail of blood-red-white fur leading into the woods. Morrison arrived in Raven Creek 2 days later. News of the gruesome deaths began to spread, despite the local police's attempts to cover them up. He began to follow the trail, and in a cheap motel, he found Joey huddled in his room. "I have no one else. I just want to find out why he didn't kill me." Morrison put his hand on his shoulder. "And maybe he needs me. Maybe I was part of his plan." At the same time, in a corner of the woods not far from the city, a woman was walking her dog when the dog suddenly howled, growling fiercely. Then it ran away. The woman turned, and standing before her was a furry creature, as tall as a man with eyes blazing in the darkness. A scream rang out, tearing through the darkness, but in the woods, no one heard it. Morrison went back to her room, spread out a large map. The attacks formed an arc, as if the creature was searching for an endpoint. And that endpoint was downtown Millstown, where the biggest night market of the year was held that weekend. A crowded place, perfect for killing. He decided, stop it, no matter what. And Joey, though trembling, said, "I'll go with you." By that time, the creature in sheep's clothing had reached the edge of town. It looked at the bright lights in the distance, the sounds of people laughing and talking from the highway. A deep roar came from its throat like the wind through a cave. In its pure white fur was an ancient monster, a creature once banished to the depths of the abyss by humans, now disguised as innocents to take revenge on the world. And the night was about to begin. The atmosphere of the Millstown Night Fair was as lively as a vivid dream. Each colored light flashed like a fire in the dark sky. Music echoed from the old loudspeakers, mixed with laughter, calls, children playing, and the fragrant smell of popcorn. No one noticed the black figure that crept through the crowd, disguised as a white fur suit. It walked slowly, its steps heavy as the wind. Every time someone saw it, they laughed. "Look at the sheep mascot. Isn't it cute?" Little did they know that inside that soft fur were hundreds of sharp teeth, a roar that sounded like it came from hell. Joey and Inspector Morrison stood on the second floor of the red brick building overlooking the whole fair. The neon lights reflected in their eyes an uneasy look. "Are you sure it will come?" Morrison asked. Joey nodded, his eyes red from lack of sleep and obsession. "It's hungry, and this is the perfect blood feast." Morrison raised his binoculars. In the distance, in the middle of the crowd, a white shadow passed by like a gust of wind. No one noticed, but he did, and he shivered. There, the creature stopped by a pastry stand. A 7-year-old girl stood not far away, holding a heart-shaped balloon in her hand. She looked at the sheep, smiling innocently. "Sheep, sheep!" The girl moved closer, reaching out to touch the fur. The fur moved. Joey screamed from afar, running towards the girl. Morrison pulled out his pistol and crossed the crowd, but it was too late. The sheep's head slowly lowered, opened, and a long tongue slithered out, wrapping around the girl in a flash, pulling her into the snow-white fur. Not a drop of blood, not a scream. Everyone was still playing. Only Joey stood frozen, shaking like a leaf. Morrison fired. 3 shots. The monster turned, its eyes glowing red. It screamed, a sound like 100 goats bleating at once, and leaped onto the roof of a booth. The crowd was in chaos now. The fair had turned into hell. The monster jumped from roof to roof, tearing, piercing, tearing apart anyone who was out of place. Morrison tried to follow, but the creature was too fast. Joey ran to the organizers, grabbed the microphone. "Everyone must leave here. This is no joke. A monster is among us." Many people saw blood. They began to believe. Screams echoed across the square. Morrison hid behind a hot dog cart, slinging his rifle. He whispered, "You've killed enough." The creature was standing in the middle of the Ferris wheel, blood on its claws, its jaw still laced with human flesh. A shot pierced its shoulder. It roared, turned its head. Morrison fired a second shot, hitting it in the neck. The creature staggered. Joey rushed forward, throwing a homemade gasoline can that hit the monster. Fire erupted. Its screams tore through the night. People thought it was dead, but in the sea of fire, the monster was still moving, slower but not falling. It jumped straight up to the fountain in the middle of the square. Morrison fired a final shot into its forehead. The monster raised its head to the sky, howled like a demon, and collapsed. Its entire body was on fire. People ran in panic. The police were late. When they arrived, the monster's body was charred black. But amidst the ashes, nothing remained but a small horn, curved like a goat's, scorched. Joey and Morrison looked at each other. The night was over. But they knew in their hearts that creature was not alone. And somewhere in the middle of the desolate grasslands, a sheep's cry rang out, lost and lonely, but filled with infinite murderous intent. Joey sat at the old wooden table in Inspector Morrison's small office. The yellow light of the lamp highlighted the scratches on the tabletop and the scattered maps. The charred horn in the middle of the table was a cold, haunting reminder. "This horn is unlike anything I've ever seen," Joey said, his voice low and strained. "It's curved like a goat's horn, but not a normal goat's. There's something very unusual about it," Morrison mused, running his fingers over a map of the desolate lands around Millstown. The locals still tell tales of the sheep-wolf, a creature that was around 100 years ago, hunting at night, but no one believes it. Joey jumped up, his eyes shining. "Is it true? If so, it might not be the first time it's appeared. We need to investigate." Their investigation begins with tales from the local elders. An old woman on the edge of town tells of a monster that terrorizes the nearby villages, turning missing people into bloodstains in the woods. "That sheep," the old woman says, her voice trembling, "isn't a real sheep. It's a shape-shifting, intelligent creature. It only appears on moonless nights." Joey and Morrison begin compiling a list of mysterious disappearances over the decades, of bloodstains, eerie cries in the woods, and strange footprints that no one can explain. Meanwhile, Joey realizes he's no longer safe. One night, as he's walking home from a meeting, he feels the cold gaze of some creature watching him from behind. Heavy footsteps, white fur shimmering in the darkness. The monster sheep is back. Joey ran, his heart pounding, but the growling and clawing sound followed closely behind, almost disorienting him. Luckily, Morrison appeared in time, pointing his flashlight and gun. "Run, Joey, don't look back!" The monster stopped, its red eyes reflecting the night, then disappeared into the dense forest. Joey and Morrison understood that their enemy was not just a lone creature, but a great mystery that contained more danger than they had imagined. They decided to head to the wild northern grasslands, where the legend of the monster originated. Under the silver moonlight, the creepy tree shadows stretched out like ghostly hands, signaling an upcoming confrontation. The morning mist still hung over the vast moors as Joey and Inspector Morrison set out for Millstown. No one spoke much, for they knew the journey would not be easy. Behind them were terrifying tales of the beast in sheep's clothing, a creature that had haunted the hearts of the people for decades. Before them lay the dense, desolate northern forest where the legend had begun. Morrison led the way, his old eyes scanning the tiny trail covered in dead leaves. He followed, taking deep breaths and listening to every sound around him. The chilling feeling in his spine was undeniable, especially when the small noises in the forest kept coming up like mysterious whispers. "What do you think we'll find?" Joey asked, trying to hide his anxiety. Morrison paused, looked at the folded map in his hand, and replied in a low voice, "Only the truth lies here in the middle of the forest. But you must know, not all truths are pleasant." The path ahead of them was not only full of thorny bushes, but also contained countless dangers that they could not yet foresee. With each step deeper into the forest, the air became thick. The moisture seemed to cling to every fiber of their being, making them feel as if invisible hands were dragging them toward the darkness. In the evening, they set up camp by the small stream, where the sound of trickling water echoed steadily like music in the night. Morrison lit a fire, the warm yellow light flickering in the thick darkness, and Joey sat beside him, his eyes fixed on the shadows of the trees moving gently in the wind. "I heard people talk about sheep-wolf since I was a child," Morrison began, his voice sad. "They say it's not a beast, but a cursed creature. It hunts in a very subtle way, changing shape to deceive humans, then appearing when people least expect it." Joey shuddered. "Can it really change shape? I used to think it was just a sick animal." Morrison shook his head, his eyes sparkling with experience. "No, Joey, there are many things beyond our understanding. And the more you learn, the deeper you'll find yourself entering a world that science can't handle." They were silent for a few minutes, listening only to the sounds of the fire and the chirping of insects. But then a faint moan from the edge of the forest startled them, their eyes following the dense darkness outside. "Sounds like someone calling for help," Joey whispered, drawing his gun. Morrison stood up, pulling Joey along. "Here, be careful. It could be a trap or it." They stepped into the darkness, each step slow but sure, preparing for the unimaginable things that awaited them. The darkness was as thick as an invisible curtain covering the forest. Only the footsteps and heavy breathing of Joey and Morrison broke the silence. The moaning still echoed, faint but incessant, like a bewitching and dangerous cry for help. Joey gripped his gun tightly, the flashlight flashing in and out, illuminating the leaves soaked with the night dew. Morrison walked ahead, his eyes observing every corner, every newly turned patch of dirt. The cold air, the musty smell, and the scent of the forest wrapped around their every breath, creating an indescribable curtain of horror. "The scream seems to be coming from the east," Morrison whispered, his voice strained. They passed through the bushes, climbing a small knoll, where the scream grew louder, mixed with the howling wind through the trees and strange, unidentifiable sounds. Suddenly, the light from Joey's flashlight caught a small figure curled up next to a large old tree. Joey rushed forward, gasping for breath as he realized it was a young girl, her clothes torn, her face dirty, but her eyes still filled with pain and despair. "Are you okay?" he asked hastily. The girl didn't answer, just looked at them with a blank gaze, then suddenly staggered to her feet. For a moment under the weak light, Joey noticed something unusual. Her skin was pale, Her eyes were bright like strange lights from another world. Morrison was alert, pulling out his gun, and Joey gently took her hand, trying to stay calm. "We're here to help you," the girl suddenly spoke, her voice hoarse and lost. I can't leave this place. The darkness has taken hold of me." The air suddenly became heavier, as if the darkness in the forest was thickening, pressing in around them. The sound of the wind seemed to turn into a whisper, haunting. Joey sensed that something was very wrong, very dangerous. The girl was not just an ordinary victim. She was like a part of the jungle, a wandering ghost trapped between the living and the dead. Morrison said sternly, "We have to get her back safely, but remember, don't let yourself be isolated. Whatever happens, we have to stay together." The group began to move. The girl walked very lightly, as if not feeling tired, but her eyes always followed the darkness behind them, where there were red eyes sparkling, silhouettes passing by as if lurking, waiting for the opportunity to pounce. Joey suddenly realized this journey was not just a war between humans and monsters. This was also a confrontation between life and death, between light and darkness, where the fragile boundary could be erased at any moment. The air grew colder. Each of their steps seemed to sink deeper into the land of darkness. The girl remained silent, only her eyes shone with an unspeakable pain. Morrison looked around, feeling the presence of strange creatures lurking in the darkness. Suddenly, from within the forest, a long howl echoed, causing Joey and Morrison to turn around to look. Creepy sounds and strange noises began to ring around them, like an inviting ghostly music. "Get ready," Morrison whispered. "They're coming." The dark figures rushed out of the forest, their bloodshot eyes reflecting the flashlight. But when the light hit, the beasts appeared in strange shapes. Not sheep or wolves, but a monstrous mixture, sharp claws, bodies covered in thick fur, emitting a terrifying growl. Joey fired continuously. The sound of the gunfire echoed through the old forest, but the creatures moved as fast as ghosts, miraculously dodging the bullets. The girl suddenly let out a miserable scream, crying into the night. "They can't come near, they must be punished." A strange light emitted from her hand, a powerful energy that made the creatures retreat, groaning in pain. Morrison and Joey looked at her in amazement. The girl was no longer a victim, but a warrior of darkness and light, waging a constant internal war. The battle for survival began amid the growls, gunshots, and mournful cries, where the jungle was forever haunted by nameless horror. The night was thick, the growls still echoed around them like an inescapable curse. The strange monsters kept charging, but the girl, with her determined eyes, used her mysterious power to repel each attack. Joey felt his heart pounding so hard that it was difficult to breathe. Cold sweat ran down his forehead. Morrison kept shooting, but they knew that the monster's power could not be defeated simply by guns and bullets. Suddenly, the girl turned to look at them, her voice filled with determination. "If you want to live, you must believe me. I am not the enemy, but the key to saving everyone from this disaster." Joey looked at her. In her eyes were suffering, sacrifice, and an indomitable belief. The group knew that the journey ahead was long and dangerous, but only unity and faith could lead them out of the darkness. The rooster crowed, signaling the approaching dawn. The faint light spread, dispelling the gloomy shadows. The monsters fell into a weakened state, gradually retreating into the deep darkness. They stood in the middle of the forest, breathing a sigh of relief. But no one knew what tomorrow would bring, whether the darkness was truly dispelled or just a lull before a new storm. As the first light of dawn gently penetrated the forest canopy, Joey, Morrison, and the girl stood silently looking into the distance, where the darkness gradually receded, giving way to warm light. But in their hearts, the feeling of anxiety did not subside. This was only the beginning of a relentless battle with that monstrous creature. The girl, whom Joey now knew as Lila, became much weaker as the sun rose. The wounds on her skin faded, but her eyes still sparkled with deep sadness. Lila sat down next to the tent, placing her hand over her fast, irregularly beating heart. "I can't stay here much longer," she said, her voice trembling. "Every time the darkness covers me, it pulls me back. It's a curse, a fate I can't escape." Joey felt his heart tighten. He couldn't imagine the pain she must have endured, trapped between two worlds, life and death, light and darkness. Morrison patted Joey on the shoulder and said, "We have to find a way to free her and at the same time stop that monster before it kills more innocent people." While they were debating their next move, a long, sickening laugh rang out from afar. It seemed to come from the darkness itself, haunting them, chilling their flesh. "They're not going to stop," Lila said, standing up with a determined look in her eyes. "They want me to go back to them, or drag you into the abyss." Joey gripped Lila's hand, telling himself that he wouldn't let that happen. "We'll fight. No one will be left behind." They braced themselves for the final confrontation as darkness once again fell and the curse of the sheep monster began to spread terror into the night. As the night fell, pitch black, the forest seemed to come alive with the most terrifying sounds. The wind whistled through the dry branches, the rustling of leaves echoed like invisible footsteps lurking. Joey, Morrison, and Lila stood still, preparing for the final battle, where they would have to face the monstrous nightmare in the form of a night lamb. Joey held his gun tightly in his hand, his eyes shining brightly as he stared into the deep darkness ahead. Morrison whispered as if to reassure himself and his teammates. "Just one more time. We must fight for life." Lila stepped forward, her eyes filled with determination and endless pain. "I will lead them to their hiding place, where the souls are captured. If I don't destroy the source, the darkness will never end." They advanced deeper into the forest, the darkness gradually enveloping. Every sound became unpleasant and creepy. Suddenly, from afar, a red light flashed and the figure of a monster appeared, an unusual sheep. Huge with white fur but as messy as a lion's mane, sharp claws and razor-sharp teeth. Joey feared the sound of bullets resounding, but the monster only shuddered and charged forward as fast as lightning. Lila quickly raised her hand. A magical light emitted, blinding the beast and forcing it to take a step back. The battle began fiercely. Morrison and Joey fired continuously, but the monster moved flexibly like a ghost, scratching and jumping at each person. The growls and hoarse screeches mixed with the gunfire created a terrifying soundtrack. Lila continuously chanted incantations, the magical power emitted from her like an invisible shield, protecting her teammates, while also causing damage to the monster. But that power was also gradually exhausted with each attack. Finally, with a scream of pain, the sheep monster was thrown against a large tree, falling to the ground with its fur singed, blood seeping from deep wounds. Joey stepped forward, carefully raising his gun, aiming straight at the monster's heart. A loud bang rang out. The monster screamed in pain, then gradually disappeared in a puff of thick black smoke. Everything gradually fell silent. Only the three people's tired breathing could be heard. Dawn began to appear, dispelling the last gloomy shadows of the night. Lila looked up at the sky, her voice filled with serenity. "The darkness has retreated, but I know it will never disappear completely. But today we have won a part of the light." Joey and Morrison nodded, knowing that they had just overcome the greatest challenge of their lives. The darkness still covered, thick and heavy like an invisible curtain that could not be lifted. Joey, Morrison, and Lila walked slowly, each step weighed down by exhaustion and fear. They knew that at any moment the monsters would emerge from the darkness, lurking and waiting for an opportunity to strike. Lila paused, her eyes piercing the endless night as if she were seeing something only she could see. "They're so close," she whispered. "And this time, they're not just trying to scare, they're going to kill." A wail sounded in the distance, the wind carrying a stench that made Morrison cover her nose. It was the sound of mutated sheep, ferocious, growling like ancient beasts, stalking their prey. Joey gripped his gun, his heart pounding with excitement. "We can't run forever," Joey said, his voice shaky but determined. "The only way is to confront." Lila nodded, her eyes flashing with a strange power. "I will use all my strength, but you must protect me and do not let anything get in the way." The battle began in the dark night. The horror creatures rushed in like a pack of mad wolves, sharp claws slashing, long crooked teeth ready to tear. Joey and Morrison fired bullets at them, but the monsters kept advancing, fast and terrifyingly cruel. Lila stood in the middle of the encirclement, raising her hands. Magical lights began to erupt, forming a shield to protect the three of them in the midst of a storm of horror creatures. But her power was not limitless. With each attack, Lila had to use all her life force to block, and the light from her hands gradually weakened. Finally, the largest monster, with eyes as red as hellfire, stepped forward. It let out a roar that shook the entire forest, charging straight at Lila. Joey screamed, raising his gun to shoot straight at it, and Morrison rushed to support. But not fast enough. The monster used its sharp claws to knock Morrison aside, rushing to attack Lila. In the moment of life and death, Lila opened her eyes wide. A bright energy burst throughout the forest, causing the monster to stop, retreating with a painful groan. "Come on, we can't let it win," Joey shouted loudly, advancing to fight like never before. Morrison slowly stood up, despite the pain, still trying to create a siege with his teammates, gradually pushing back the monsters. The sound of a rooster crowing echoed in the distance, signaling the approaching dawn. The creatures began to retreat, hiding in the deep darkness. The three of them stood there, tired and exhausted, but their eyes were filled with the fire of victory and hope. Lila sighed, her eyes softening. "We survived the night, but this is just the beginning." After that terrifying night, as dawn began to break, the sky gradually became brighter, but Joey's heart was still filled with thoughts and worries that could not be forgotten. The darkness had only temporarily retreated, but the dangers in the forest were still there, lurking silently. Morrison sat by a tree, his hands still shaking from the battle. He looked towards Lila, who was leaning against the tree trunk, her face showing fatigue and deep sadness. "Can we continue?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Lila nodded, her eyes sharp but determined. "Yes, I have one more place to go. That place can help us break this curse, but it is also the most dangerous place." Joey stood up, readied his guns, and tried to dispel the uneasiness that was spreading in his heart. "No matter how dangerous it is, we have to try. We can't let that monster continue to wreak havoc." They continued their journey, following a small stream in the forest, heading towards a cave that was said to be the final refuge of imprisoned souls. According to Lila, if the energy source in that cave could be destroyed, the curse would be released. The deeper they went, the more stifling and cold the air became. Strange noises rang out from the bushes, and occasionally shadows flashed by, forcing them to stop and be on high alert. As they approached the cave entrance, a cold blast of air rushed into their faces, causing everyone to cower. The echoes in the cave were like the size of hundreds of resentful souls. Lila stepped in first, raising her hand to chant. A blue light spread, illuminating the dark cave, revealing the ghostly traces, the ancient symbols carved on the stone. Suddenly, a roar rang out. Many black shadows rushed out from the corners, strange shapes, red eyes. The final battle began. Joey and Morrison fired continuously, trying to keep the distance for Lila to complete the exorcism ritual. Lila repeated the incantation over and over, her magical power rising, blending with the light in the cave. The black shadows gradually shrank, screaming in pain, then dissipated like smoke. A beam of dazzling light emitted, erasing the long-standing darkness. When the light went out, everything became strangely peaceful. Lila was exhausted, falling into Joey's arms. Morrison stood still, breathing a sigh of relief. "We did it," Lila said, her voice choked. "The curse has been broken." But Joey knew that, even though the darkness had retreated, they would never forget the nights of terror, the life and death battles, and the friendship and love that had helped them through. Dawn had broken through the trees, a pale yellow light filtering through the leaves, dispelling the lingering chill of the long, haunting night. Joey, Morrison, and Lila stood outside the cave, their eyes still filled with fatigue, but with new hope. Lila spoke, her voice gentle but firm. "The darkness has no power now, but we need to go back, tell everyone the truth, so they don't get caught up in that vortex of terror." Joey nodded, his eyes looking toward the distant horizon. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. We fought hard, and no matter what happens, we will never give up." Morrison smiled, her eyes shining with new faith. "And most importantly, we have each other." The three of them walked towards the dawn, leaving behind the darkness that had long enveloped them. Their determined and hopeful steps seemed to mark a new beginning, for a life no longer haunted by monsters and curses. The deep forest was still quiet, but it was no longer a place of horror and terror. It became a symbol of human victory over darkness, of courage and immortal humanity. And in each person's mind, there was a story that would be told forever, about the monster sheep, about the life and death battle, and about the light that finally dispelled the darkness.